Welcome back to the Shaman's Camp. Coming to you tonight from Barrow Hill, as you see. We have a few issues tonight. Arrangements are a bit unorthodox. It's best not to ask. Can you all hear? In the back? Yes? Good. Welcome to my camp. Tonight, we're reading Lace by the author Boots. Let's get to it. It had been many years since I'd driven that country road, but familiarity of its treacherous curves, nestled in tight, rolling hills, still felt like routine. I remember there were always pieces of motorcycles scattered along the road. Even this time, jacket parts rested on the sharpest corners, serving as a distraction when more recent memories wore their welcome. The people I was traveling to meet were old friends, but a cold, dark winter ended the heartfelt antics suddenly. Now our friendships had waned. I had damn near fallen off the face of the earth. I guess, really, it was my fault they'd fallen on the back burner. They'd each made the best of their respective lives in my absence. I'd argue until I'm blue in the face that their lives weren't my cup of tea, but then again, I was the only one amongst us that was so restless. Tiffany's job hadn't changed in the time I'd been gone. She still crunched numbers and she still lived her simple life, waddling to and from each routine that she knew. Marie, as I understood it, was an arborist. Trees suited her. Watson, shockingly, had started a family. I'm not sure who the woman was that he convinced to give him a kid, but good for him. And finally, John's business, its inception alone, also news to me, was thriving. I loved them all, but John held a special place in my heart, and I had been a bad friend, missing all these milestones to ease my own wayward disdain. I convinced the group to go camping in the middle of nowhere on a lonely, winding river. Marie, Tiffany, and Watson were coming from a different route and would meet us outside the town by the National Forest lands, while John and I met up to carpool to the destination. Our initial greeting was extensively warm, catching up on key moments, but it didn't take long to exhaust small talk on the road ahead. John's expression grew somewhat mournful, perhaps perplexed was more appropriate. Did you ever think that we, us, could have been more? John finally spoke, eyes staring at the road ahead. I was silent for the longest time. I never saw you that way, I lied flatly, afraid to admit the mistake I'd made leaving him behind so abruptly. Clearly, you didn't think that way the night before you left, he retorted, equally as flat. My cheeks flushed hot, but I didn't acknowledge. Neither did he, opting to squeeze the steering wheel in awkward frustration. The silence hadn't lifted, and eventually I directed my attention to the scenery. The road dropped deep into a steep river valley, allowing its walls to scale unnervingly high above us, until eventually both the road and the river meandered on the same plane, paralleling each other. Towering conifers stretched to the sky to steal as much of the sun's warmth as possible, each fighting for the most gluttonous seat in the dense forest. I had completely zoned out, nearly drifting to sleep. Suddenly, the passenger tire hit a sharp pothole, jarring both my body and my senses. John apologized, but I didn't acknowledge. choosing to focus on the road instead. Just a silent treatment. The river had reached a point in its course where it had grown to a gentle gradient with wide sweeping bends. Gravel beds rested on generous banks, save for one where the water drove at a harsh 90-degree angle, exposing a mud cliff as the water carved into the earth. A mighty tree had crumbled down the cliff, its branches soon to drown. Here, limping across the shallow gravel bones of the river, an injured stag struggled to gain its footing. It was soaked in blood. It stumbled, slipping on the algae-covered rocks before collapsing into a nook on the root ball of the fallen tree. The stag desperately gasped for air and then dug its face into the mud, devouring it like sweet nectar in a maddening frenzy. "John," I half whispered, "look at it. It's hurt. What is it doing?" "Animals do weird things when they're dying," he grumbled, until he reevaluated my concern. "It must have been hit by a car or a shot." I wearily agreed, finding no other solace in the sight. Nearing the end of the road portion of the journey, we rolled through a small town with little to its name other than recreation. A handful of locals eyed us emotionless as we strolled through where the engine made a horrible clattering sound. Abruptly, the vehicle shuddered, stalled, and rolled to a stop, and the expression on the residents hadn't changed despite the obvious disarray we discovered. John twisted the key without success. "Well, shit," John said, hitting the side of the vehicle. I don't have a signal." My face scrunched up as I looked at my phone. "There's a bar not too far back. I guess that's as good a place as any to start. Let's go." Entering the bar, John spoke with the bartender while I stood back, eavesdropping on a frustrated ranger ranting about a local problem bear. At least that explained the wounded stag earlier, I suppose. I checked my phone and noticed that it had a single bar. Not enough for a call, but enough for a text. I sent a quick text explaining the scenario to Tiffany and received an even quicker response from her agreeing to meet us at the bar. See, how can the response be quicker than the text he sent her? If he doesn't know how much... Never mind. Just curious. The bartender was as helpful as a screen door on a submarine, responding in affirmative or negative grunts at best. And as John tried all his tricks to win him over, a small group of regulars made their appearances. They passed shifting glances and scoffed, feeding off each other's darting expressions. I had missed exactly how it started, and perhaps there wasn't an obvious retelling, but suddenly John found himself trying to diffuse the misplaced tempers of the ragtag group of rednecks. The pointless aggression from the strangers escalated. I found myself shoved around after a miserably failed attempt at supporting my comrade, and John cocked his shoulder to fight, no longer bothering with de-escalation. "That's enough, Jamie," the ranger commanded, accompanied with paste-hard footsteps and his hand on the hilt of his gun. "Oh, we ain't mean nothing of it," Jamie, the skinny hick with greasy hair, slinked. "Oh, it sure seems like a whole lot of something." The ranger now walked quickly. "Sounds to me like you're bored and looking for trouble. You think your mama wants to bail you out of jail again." "Sir, leave my mama out of this. I ain't mean him no harm." Jamie stalled for an answer to get himself out of the hole he had dug. "Look, I'll even help him out. I overheard them talking that their car ain't right. My brother's got a shop and plenty of dead cars to poach parts and fix shit up. We'll set this right. No need to call mama. No need to take me to jail again." The ranger relaxed. He had known the folks in his district well enough to know how to avoid unnecessary nonsense, and he also knew that Jamie was all bark and little bite. He turned to us and eyed us briefly. "Now listen, Jamie's an asshole, but he's a coward to boot. You give me a call the second you pull into the shop, or the second," he now turned to Jamie, "he gives you even a sideways glance." Jamie averted his eyes. At some point during the altercation, the rest of our companions slipped inside the bar. As soon as I noticed them, I whispered to them that I'd explain later, allowing the ranger the chance for any closing thoughts without interruption. He nodded before swiftly sauntering to the door, and Jamie shuffled forward. "My brother lives out of town, just right out of town," Jamie shrugged. "Like I said, he's got a shop. Come on." Jamie begrudgingly walked out to a beaten truck, pulling a tow rope from the back as beer cans cluttered in the bed. He spoke as few words as possible with John to plot towing, and hopped inside his rig, gesturing to his clan to follow. We switched occupants in the vehicles so I could fill in Tiffany and Marie on the encounter they'd witnessed, and John steered his car behind Jamie's with Watson in the passenger seat. Jamie led the caravan down a parked and narrow dirt road, his truck nearly ejecting trash and various debris at some of the largest potholes. As we progressed, we quickly learned that just outside of town, a different expanse of distance than we expected, and soon any semblance of a town long faded. Jamie hit a particularly large pothole that made his truck choke. It spat out a small plume of pale smoke and slowed a bit before growling and regaining its composure. The smoke whirred behind the truck when Jamie directed the vehicle to the right, following in an obscure driveway marked only by two well-trodden tie rods. On closer inspection, they were rusted heaps of former cars parked en masse within the trees. At the end of the meager road rested an equally rusted and decrepit shop with a small log cabin beside it. We parked our vehicles and waited for a command from Jamie. "Bill!" Jamie cupped his hand over his mouth to project his already boisterous voice. "Bill, where you at?" He walked towards the garage and opened the side door, leaving everyone to wait in deafening silence. The only sound heard was the shrill squeal of the tired door's hinge swaying in the wind. Tiffany jumped when Jamie reappeared suddenly, knocking firmly on her window. She rolled the window down quickly to halt his harsh greeting. "He ain't in his house, and he ain't in his shop, but his truck's here." Tiffany didn't respond. "He's here somewhere, likely out back taking a shit." "Oh," Tiffany said, the displeasure in her tone obvious. "Well, I guess come on inside for a beer or something." The cabin was a mess, to put it mildly. I can't say I was surprised. The front door led to a central living area with a stone fireplace on the left side of the house, and to the right was a small kitchen space. An impressive deer's head adorned the fireplace mantel, and a few less impressive heads found themselves in other locations of the cabin. On either side of the fireplace were wooden doors, presumably leading to closets, and to the back of the kitchen perched a rickety set of stairs to a loft bedroom. The underside of the stairs served as a pantry storage, and strewn throughout there was trash and dust. "So," I spoke with uncertainty, dragging out the O, "are we sure your brother's here?" I shifted uneasily when one of Jamie's croonies, a burly man in a trucker hat, hastily stood up and walked to the front door. My unease morphed to dread, however, when he swung the door open and, instead of the view of the junkyard, found a brick wall sturdily mounted in the door's frame. Trucker Hat staggered back, as if he had been sucker punched in the gut. "What is this shit?" he roared. The nervous woman he travelled with, a gaunt thing with frayed red hair, fidgeted anxiously before she let out an exasperated wail and threw the first stout object she could at a window. I would have been more alarmed at her lack of composure had physics behaved as they should, but the window was unharmed after her assault. She threw a chair at it. It should have shattered. Collectively, we stared, dumb in disbelief. "Hey!" Jamie tried to react sanely. Don't trash my brother's place. He'll be pissed." John shot an icy glare at Jamie before grabbing a cast iron pot and hurling it at the window with the same reaction as the chair. "Is there a back door?" I spoke quickly to stop the chaos of further projectile objects. "There's a cellar door," Jamie responded eagerly, immediately approaching the door to the right of the mantel. He jerked the door open, while momentum carried his body forward as he would normally do to descend the stairs to the cellar. But he pulled short, falling backwards onto his ass with a hard thud as he recoiled in fear. He crawled away from the door, which now revealed an impossible and sinister hallway. Like a magician's bag when the illusionist pulls out an entire ladder, the hallway did not fit the physical footprint of the cabin. What light poured into the hallway quickly found itself devoured by choking darkness, and we clustered around the doorway in a mix of fear and awe. John shut the door before anyone could speak. Our silence and inaction was enough of an answer, and we individually tried whatever means to escape we could think of. But nothing changed. The windows wouldn't break. The front door was always bricks. Eventually, we found ourselves staring at the door to the right of the mantel once again. I reached for it, testing it like a hot surface. Every sound of the doorknob turning made my heart plummet, and I stepped back to strain my eyes into the cold darkness beyond when the door was fully opened. "Go on now, Jamie," I whispered, afraid to attract attention from the darkness. "Lead the way." He opened his mouth to protest, but not a soul in the cabin was willing to hear his lame excuses. He sighed agreeably. Tiffany grabbed a nearby candle and passed it to him, and Jamie scanned the room for any semblance of a weapon, quickly grabbing a baseball bat tucked behind the couch. He stepped forward into the dark hall. Slowly, we filed in behind him, but with a scant buffer between us. The hallway was completely vacant. The only visual stimuli were the grains of wood and the dancing shadows cast by candlelight. As we progressed, the walls narrowed, forcing us to advance one or two abreast. Meanwhile, the darkness grew thicker, almost heavy, limiting our vision so that neither the front of the line could see the rear nor vice versa. And it was impossible to see any remnants of the door. Jamie's leadership quickly faltered. As his arrogance waned, his sure steps turned to shaky stumbles, and he held the bat up in defense, sometimes swinging it in front of him blindly. Attempting to mask his fear with frustration, he berated us for trailing too slowly, until at last something broke the monotonous repetition of wooden planks. A crossroads. The hallway split to 3 directions. An obscured upward stairwell loomed ahead of us, and on either side were doors. Desperate to reclaim his sense of composure again, Jamie quickly chose the door on the right. It was abrupt, barely allowing space for the group, and another door rested in its furthest corner. This new room offered even less space, and it seemed that the deeper into this mad series of chambers, the more cramped and the more chaotic the rooms became, so that things were cockeyed and abstract and too narrow for a quick passage. Rooms the size of caskets led to twisting passages that required the traveler to advance sideways or crawl. There were dead ends and false doors, with only frames set into solid wall. The rooms now had a few things to look at, although their presence was far less pleasant than the monotonous and blank paneling we had grown familiar with. There was nothing exceptionally awful, but the visual disturbance jarred our strained eyes and forced us to look harder each time we saw an errant object in the shifting, weak light of the candle. A ceramic beagle with drooping eyes, a dress on a mannequin's bust, outdated and unlived furniture. What is that? Tell me, Boots, what is unlived furniture? I have an idea, but I'm not sure. You let me know. Each thing would be a relic of an otherwise homey array if weren't placed as offerings in the labyrinth. Trucker Hat and Jamie began to argue after what felt like hours wandering the wooden catacombs. Trucker Hat had enough and wanted to turn back. After a brief shouting match, he grabbed a candle from Tiffany and looked to the red head. "You coming?" His tone held more authority than question. As she was silent, sulking behind the others. "I'd rather stay with the group," she finally spoke nervously. "Fine." He struck a match, igniting the small flame, filling the air with the sharp smell of hot wax. As the flame stabilized itself, he stood before the darkness behind us, hesitating briefly and finally disappearing around a heinous corner. A heinous corner, no less. His footsteps faded beyond discernment. We advanced dumbly forward without him, gaining confidence solely due to repetition and complacency. There hadn't been any surprises in ours until we found ourselves in a room with a slanted floor. The angle would feel uneasy in a normal setting, but here the darkness seemed to relish the added distress, and seemed to grow darker as we tested each footstep before securing the stance. Jamie reached for a crooked door only to hear something rustling on the other side. He tightened his grip around the bat and held his index finger to his mouth, gesturing to us. He fixed his panic gaze on the door and then, watching it turn slowly and click. It slowly swung forward and Jamie sprung into action. Trucker Hat yelped on the other side. "How'd you get there?" Jamie sneered. "Fuck if I know," Trucker Hat retorted. His pride injured. I ain't putting up with this nonsense. Get out of my way." He shoved his way through where... Okay, I hear you. I got you. Rude. He shoved his way through where we had just advanced, fully intending to return as if he had just looped the maze. But when he opened the door, it was not the rooms we had left, but instead now the original dark hallway. And Trucker Hat stared, a look of fear, anger, and confusion battling on his face. Anger eventually took center stage, and he grabbed Redhead, and that's apparently just her name now, by the arm and dragged her to join him. Jamie quickly followed them into the veil of blackness down the cursed hall. And not a moment later, a light gust shivered from their direction, as if the darkness had exhaled. The candle hissed and extinguished. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I was afraid that my panicked heart would be too loud, slamming blood through the vessels of my frightened body. We tried to be small in that crippling darkness, like helpless babes exposed and abandoned, and we waited, dreaded, the next moment. We held our breath. That's plural, we held our breaths. Forgive me. There was a quiet but distinct gurgling gasp, the sound of fluid in lungs followed by a curdling shriek from Redhead, and concluded by a horrifying, inhuman wail. The group scattered at the noise, and someone grabbed my arm, guiding me forward through the maze once again. In the scant artificial light of a cell phone, I could faintly see John pulling me. We had been separated from the others in the scramble to survive. The last door we shoved open revealed an abnormally small bathroom. John yanked the shower curtain to one side to decide its occupancy, and found another mannequin in its black lace dress tucked inside. We rested there until we could no longer endure the anticipated and unseen threat. Retracing our steps was useless, as we knew. The house was alive. It changed every time we looked away from it. When the darkness overtook a room behind our lights, it had its way, warping the architecture as it desired to create its roulette of doors. Eventually, we revealed a door to that hallway, that perfectly horrifying hallway. We had no other route. John gently pushed me That owl is not happy. John gently pushed me behind him, lacing our fingers together to keep me pulled close behind him. And we began our cautious advance. See, I don't know that the main character is female or male. We simply haven't been told. I mean, it's kind of implied it's a female, but I don't know. Some strange wording here, I will say. We'll continue. The shadows had become a thick maze that lessened the effectiveness of our meager candle. The light only penetrated an arm's reach ahead of us, forcing us to look at our feet for direction. I hear you, Owl, and I'm not going anywhere. You're just gonna have to take it. He's not even talking to me, is he? Anyway. We hoped that each step forward would never illuminate the face of that monstrous cry that slaughtered our companions earlier. When John flinched, so did I. The jarring contrast of dark blood broke the monotony of the floor. He froze to judge the best course of action, and I peered around him, his grasp on my hand tightening as I swayed around him to see. Whoever bled out on the floor before us had been dragged through it, the trail disappearing into the quiet black abyss. 2 sets of shoe prints crossed the bloody trail, one slipping briefly on the sanguine mess. A third print emerged as well, but it wore no shoe. Instead, breastly feet, beastly feet, with 3 claws each, one more like a thumb, tracked across the floor in crimson. Those horrible prints followed the shoe prints until all diverged, where the hall split to doors and stairs as it did before. Except now, the stairs dripped with blood from whatever dragged the body up them. It was an easy decision to follow the shoe prints to the familiar door on the right. We found Redhead and Jamie in the room. Blood splattered across Redhead's face. "Are you okay? What happened?" I spoke in whispers.
"It came out of the darkness," the girl croaked, choking tears. I didn't see anything. It's just the darkness itself. He flinched. He turned around. And the blood just poured out of his mouth and throat onto everywhere, onto me.
And Jamie hushed her before she got too worked up.
"Have you seen our friends? Tiffany, Marie, Watson?"
"I don't know," Jamie answered. "Ah, so Jamie's still alive." "You're the first we've seen." Long silence presumed. Followed. "All these doors are dead ends. Those damn walls are behind them. Only way out is back that way." He pointed to the hallway door. He threw his head back against the wall. It seemed as though time, like the walls, was subject to the darkness' wishes. My focus jarred to attention with a start. Redhead babbling and panicking. What? My focus jarred to attention with a start. Redhead babbling and panicking. She had brandished a small pocket knife and was now swiping it blindly at Jamie. "Hey, calm down! Quit being a crazy bitch!" Jamie demanded tactlessly.
"I can't do this anymore."
She cut at the air.
"I can't be in here. I can't be in this room. That thing is in here. I can hear it breathing. Can't you? Can't you hear it?"
She sliced at another mannequin, knocking it over before darting into the hallway. Jamie bolted after her, and John and myself weren't far behind. Not that I really cared much for either of them. It was kind of their fault that we were in this mess after all. But if they both got picked off, well, that left no one else to die but us. They scuffled, but Jamie found a way to intercept her route with minimal injury from her blade. She swiped the knife back and forth at him, but he wouldn't let her pass. They bickered and yelled. Their feud seemed endless until that nightmarish screech echoed from the halls as it had before. Jamie turned around, only for the darkness to drag him forward and swallow him whole, snuffing his candle almost immediately with a powerful gust. Redhead darted backwards up the stairwell, screaming hysterically again. Straining my eyes to try to discern where Jamie had disappeared, I could hear his dying gasps, wheezes of futile effort accompanied with the occasional grunt and sticky release of meat being torn from bone. His wheezes ended with a hollow, wet thud. The darkness in front of me grew increasingly menacing, until at long last a figure stepped forth. It was a creeping, real, and visible plague in the form of an oppressive shadow. In the low light, I couldn't make out any definitive shape to its stilted limbs. It growled an inhuman and unnatural noise that sent intense waves of nausea towards a primal point in my gut. John had been yelling at me while I was frozen in fear. I hadn't heard him. He shook me to my senses, and we ran together up the stairs that we had previously avoided while the figure in the shadows pursued us eagerly. Its many legs clacked across the floor to catch us. Ooh, many, many legs. But we slammed a door at the top before it could grab its prey. I forced a lock into place. As quickly as the door sealed shut, Tiffany and Marie were comforting Redhead, and Watson was standing guard, alarmed by our sudden arrival. Before we could exchange pleasantries, however, the monster on the other side collided into the door. Thud, the door flexed. Thud, splinters shed from its weakest point, and we crowded together for comfort. Thud. We hoped for the best. The door was visibly damaged, but the monster moaned in frustrated anguish, surrendering once again to its familiar abyss behind our weakened barrier. I ran to Tiffany and hugged her tightly. When my eyes pried open, I looked at the room to gain my surroundings, and to my surprise, I realized that we were back in the main entry of the cabin. It had been ages since we left that room, but it wasn't a relief to see it. The windows were sealed, a simple frame against a solid wall. The taxidermy mounts now felt ominous. Their glassy eyes seemed to observe us with disdain. Redhead continued to sob, and her shrill cries pierced my ears. I clutched the side of my head as a wave of pain hit me, and my ears rang like they had suffered a blast. The world spun and sound muted. I struggled to maintain my consciousness. Suddenly, the deerheads frothed at the mouth and writhed. The doors shook and swelled, and the monster howled again. Have we heard it howl before, or is this the first time? Because I can't remember. Splinters fell from the failing doors, and soon the walls did the same. Small fissures appeared, and the darkness spilled into the room like heavy smoke through the cracks. Something stirred in the loft. Black thread and snippets of lace rolled out and down, spilling from the loft into a pile on the floor. The mound grew, and the fabric seemed endless, until the last length of thread fell and coiled into the pile. It rested briefly before it began to churn, undulating like intestines. Alarmingly, an emaciated hand groped wildly from the fabric, followed by a second, and eventually by the rest of the body, until the entirety of an old woman stood slouched with a mess of threads and lace draped over her. Hence the title of the story. She stretched her gaunt arms outwards, and the fabric spun around her, replenishing her. She aged in reverse before our eyes. The hag, now a young woman in a mourning dress, looked to the cracked door, and it shattered fully. The darkness behind it poured inside, unrestrained. Wisps of blackness swirled and wheezed, its frustration apparent. The hag, now a young woman in a mourning dress, looked to the cracked door, and it shattered fully. The darkness behind it poured inside, unrestrained. Wisps of blackness swirled and wheezed, its frustration apparent. Then she turned her direction to us, and we were frozen in that instant. She slowly stepped around us, offering no more than a passing glance each. When she approached Watson, she gestured to a door, and he obeyed. I struggled to get his attention, but the only sound that escaped my throat was a whimper. Still trapped by her snare, he marched slowly to the door, his footsteps fading until the last sound from the room was a wet, tearing sound. She commanded Redhead next, and she obliged with the same awful sound signaling her end. Marie was next. and my resistance now allowed some bodily autonomy against the witch. And by the time Tiffany was summoned, I slowly limped towards her. I pulled her arms, begging her to stop. The witch laughed. Tiffany would not listen and pushed me aside. She crossed the doorway to her tragic fate. John, several steps behind me, stepped next into her control. "Don't!" I pleaded. "John, stop!" I screamed, staggering towards him and pounding on his chest. A tear rolled down his cheek and his eyes slowly moved to look at me. I shoved him, hoping to stop him, but the witch raised her hand and he lifted his arm in response before swinging it like a hammer across my face. From the ground, I winced and blood filled my mouth. I struggled to my feet, but mustered the energy to pull a deer mount off the wall and hurled it at John. John stumbled over the deer, but continued his advance. I followed him into the next room over, but my stomach sank upon crossing the threshold. There were human and animal skins alike hanging from hooks, staring back from black, empty sockets. There were carcasses mangled to bits and coated in mud. In the back roared a massive, insatiable fire filled with bones and pieces that had been discarded. A trucker hat and Jamie dumbly slouched in the center of the room like props, each clutching a butcher's cleaver. The witch had stuffed their hides with mud, and it poured from the stitches she had sewn and from their empty sockets. Jamie worked robotically to slaughter John. No emotion from either. "You got a pretty face," the witch whispered into my ear. I flinched and fell forward onto what I assumed to be the remains of Jamie's brother and a bear. "Don't hurt that pretty skin," she scolded. "I can't stop your skin from rotting, from bugs eating it, and every bruise, every scrape, every small sore hastens that process. I want your pretty face. I don't come by those often." I crawled away from her over the mound of rotten flesh, and my arm brushed against the coarse fur on the bear's pelt. I dug my fingers into it, feeling the bristly hair. Its paws were stained with blood. I threw the pelt over my shoulders and endured the pain of metamorphosis. Jesus! In the shadows, the monster hissed, unable to enter the light and help its master. Roaring, I stood on my hind legs and thrashed, watching the witch's face split beneath my massive claws. I panted, tending the massacre splattered across my hands. I moaned, not a human moan, but a bear's, and with a chance to breathe, I realized now that the cabin's interior was no longer full of shadows. I looked down at the hands I thought I had cradled to see that licked the wounds of my bloodied paws instead. It literally says that. Some of these sentences are quite weird. Anyway, I cried, but only a bear's woeful growl left my lips. Dainty wisps of dust danced in the window's glow. The fire was out. The front door kicked in. The ranger from the bar stepped in holding a rifle. I stood up and hollered at him, relieved for rescue. But he's a bear now, so what's he going to do? But quickly realized I could only growl. He pulled the trigger, and as my vision blackened, I heard him radio for backup. "That bear got into Billy's place," he sighed. "There's no survivors, but the bear's dead." and that was Lace by Boots. Interesting kind of like full circle thing there at the end. So that was we can only assume that there's going to be, it's either a kind of time loop kind of thing, it's either that kind of thing, or it's just a thing that happens often, and those bears are actually people, people metamorphosized by the hag, I guess. I don't know. I thought it was a cute story. And Boots, please, forgive me if I made just a tiny bit of fun of some things. There are some things in this story which are, some of the sentences are quite weird. It is what it is, I didn't think it was a bad story. It's kind of a mixture between different, like, pop culture, horror movies and narratives that elude me right now, but I feel like it did feel familiar. A mix between... God. I have thoughts. Now, that was Lace by Boots. A charming story. So now I want you to rest, and you can do so in my camp quite safely. Especially tonight, it seems we have it mostly to ourselves. So please do that now, please rest. And, of course, when you wake up, I'll be gone. But we'll see each other again in the Shaman's camp. And I'd love to have you, by the way. Good night. Trucker hat had. Okay.